Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unraveling a genuine world changer. We're stepping right into the mind of Charles Darwin to explore the absolute origin of species. You see, when Darwin got back from his famous voyage on the HMS Beagle in 1837, he brought back a secret. He'd started connecting the dots on a concept so revolutionary, so completely earth-shattering, that he actually sat on it for over 20 years. He just quietly gathered facts, debated with himself, and was honestly terrified of the implications. It wasn't until 1859, when a young guy named Alfred Russel Wallace sent him an essay outlining the exact same theory, that Darwin was finally pushed to publish his absolute masterpiece.
And that masterpiece? Well, it sought to answer this exact question. How do the innumerable species inhabiting this world acquire their perfection of structure and co-adaptation? People back then called it the mystery of mysteries. I mean, think about it. How exactly do we get a woodpecker that is perfectly adapted to catch insects under tree bark, or a seed perfectly designed to catch the gentlest breeze? Today, we're not just going to jump straight to the conclusion. We are going to follow Darwin's own breadcrumb trail of deductive logic, step by step, to see exactly how he solved this giant puzzle. Part 1. The Power of Man. Variation under Domestication.
Okay, let's dive into this. Now, you might think a book about the wild laws of nature would kick off in some dense, uncharted jungle, right? But Darwin doesn't start there at all. He starts in the farmyard. He looks at pigeon breeders and gardeners and farmers because he figured that to understand the vast, invisible mechanisms of nature, our best clue is to see what happens when humans take control. So he focused intensely on domestic pigeons. Just look at the original wild rock pigeon on the left. It's kind of your standard slatty bluebird. But then, contrast that with what humans have turned it into over on the right. Look at the English pouter. It's got this enormously inflated crop that almost looks comical. Or the fantail, which has up to 40 perfectly expanded tail feathers instead of the normal 12, carried so high they literally touch the bird's head. If humans can take a basic rock pigeon and mold it into these bizarre, drastically different breeds in just a few centuries, it raises a massive question. What on earth could nature pull off over millions of years?
This brings us to a really beautiful quote from Lord Somerville, who was talking about the power of sheep breeders. He said, "It is the magician's wand by means of which he may summon into life whatever form and mold he pleases." Darwin points out that this kind of transformation, it doesn't happen overnight. It's all about the immense power of accumulative selection. Humans just observe these tiny, successive variations that nature provides, and we add them up in a direction that's useful to us. Sometimes it's super methodical, but honestly, a lot of times it's totally unconscious. It's just early humans keeping their best hunting dog or their best milking cow generation after generation.
Part 2. The Wild Blueprint. Variation under Nature. Let's see how this builds. So we know we can act as the selecting force. But does this happen out there without us? Well, we're leaving the pigeon coop and heading out into the untamed wilderness. The very first thing Darwin had to do was radically blur the line between what scientists called a species and what they called a variety. At the time, species were viewed as these rigid, unchangeable, completely independent creations. But Darwin looked around and saw that in nature, literally, no two individuals are perfectly identical. There are always slight differences. And when these differences stick around and get inherited, they form a variety. Darwin boldly proclaimed that a variety is actually just an incipient species. It's a species in the making. Those tiny individual differences, they're the actual raw building blocks of evolution.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the botanical data Darwin used to back this all up. Notice the pattern here. He dug into these massive plant catalogs and realized that in smaller genera, groups with very few species, there wasn't a whole lot of variation happening. But in large, dominant genera, groups that already had a ton of species, he found a huge number of new varieties constantly popping up. He called these large groups the manufactories of species. Basically, where the factory has been busy in the past, the assembly line is still wide open and running. Nature is continuously turning out new forms.
Part 3. The Math of Survival. The Struggle for Existence.
All right, so nature provides the variation. But without a human breeder to pick the best pigeon or crop, who's picking the winners? This leads us to our third breadcrumb, the struggle for existence. We tend to look at nature and see this incredibly peaceful scene, right? Birds singing, plenty of food, a happy forest. But what we don't see is the brutal, invisible war raging just beneath the surface. To really grasp this, we have to look at the sheer, mind-blowing math of reproduction.
Darwin actually took the economic doctrines of Thomas Malthus and applied them to the entire plant and animal kingdoms. Take the elephant. It's considered the slowest breeding animal on Earth. But Darwin calculated that if you take just one single pair of elephants and they live a normal lifespan, in just 500 years, that single pair would have 15 million descendants alive on Earth. 15 million! From the slowest breeder imaginable. No way, right?
And yet the world is obviously not overrun with elephants. Why? Because of the checks on population increase. Every single living thing out there is trying to multiply exponentially, but they hit a wall. A harsh winter, a severe drought, a total scarcity of food, predators, parasites, you name it. Darwin said nature is like a wielding surface struck continuously by 10,000 sharp wedges. So the absolute crucial takeaway here is this. Because infinitely more individuals are born than can possibly survive, there is a constant brutal competition for life. Nature is incessantly, ruthlessly selecting who gets to live and who dies.
Part 4. The Tangled Web, the Web of Life.
But listen, this struggle, it isn't just a simple one-on-one battle between two animals fighting over a scrap of food. It's infinitely more complex. Every living thing is bound together in this incredibly intricate ecological web. And this brilliantly illustrates the point. Darwin tracked a mind-blowing chain right in his own neighborhood. He noted that red clover can only be pollinated by humblebees. No other bee can reach the nectar. So if the humblebees disappear, the red clover is gone for good. But what controls the bees? Field mice. Mice constantly destroy their nests. And what controls the mice? Cats. So Darwin realized that the number of cats in a village basically dictates the number of mice, which allows the bees to thrive, which then allows the red clover to grow. The presence of a neighborhood cat literally determines the survival of a flower. Now that is a tangled web of life.
So let's pull all of Darwin's breadcrumbs together. We've got continuous slight variations, we've got a brutal struggle for existence because of overpopulation, and we have a wildly complex web of ecological relationships. So any slight variation, no matter how tiny, if it happens to give an individual an edge in this chaotic, violent, beautiful web, that individual is going to have a better shot at surviving. And it's going to pass that winning trait on to the next generation. That is the forge of natural selection. It is a power that is incessantly ready for action, silently and continuously working to perfect every living being.
Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought. Now that you've got Darwin's blueprint, go look out your window. When you see a tangled bank of plants, or even just a weed pushing up through the sidewalk, remember the incredible forces at play. What invisible battles for survival, what slow, magnificent adaptations are happening right now, in your very own backyard. Keep that in mind next time you step outside. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.